English translation 617th Contact Sunday, the 15th of March 2015, 14:17 hours.
You are already waiting, which I am a little surprised about because I did not call you. But of course I am happy anyway. There must be a special reason why you're coming back, or is there something special that we need to discuss? But be greeted and welcome, dear friend.
Greetings to you too, Edward, my friend. Of course something will happen, namely what Florina and Njana told me, who were with you last night and to whom you told the events that took place with him. I am worried about that for your health.
Oh well, of course, and that brings you here, which certainly wouldn't have been necessary because the matter has been settled, because has applied for his core group resignation. And with regard to my health, which I am sure you mean the heart, everything's fine.
But I would also like to hear from you personally what has happened, even though I know the records of Florina. It is always better to have a conversation and hear statements personally from a person who is directly involved in a matter. And because I thought that the whole thing was preoccupying you so I am coming here to talk to you about it and see how you're doing healthily. So let's hear what you have to say.
Well, it's actually the case that has been with me because he can't cope with what you've said about his timeout behavior, this among other things. So I tried to talk to him and make him understand that he needs to know for himself what he wants to do. However, he did not accept this, but reproached me for the fact that in the FIGU extensively wrong rules exist, etc., and that the members were insulted in the contact reports and that he, since he was in the FIGU, always waited in vain for me as a leader at the meetings to mark the individual members, so that they would have to disclose their inner conflicts to all group members, and thus out themselves. Allegedly various or even all core group members should have internal conflicts. Of course, only he himself, as a social pedagogue, should not. So I should have gone for the members in his sense so that they would come out in relation to their alleged internal conflicts. Of course, this is exactly what I have not done, nor will I ever do, because if we in the FIGU were to act among ourselves in this way, as he thinks it should be, then we would be like a psychosect, such as various religious sects, and Scientology is probably the worst of all psychosects. Well, he didn't allow himself to explain that, so he complained again, saying that exactly that was the fact that problems were not discussed, but were always said that everyone had to know for himself what he was doing. He did not want, and does not want to understand that we in the FIGU strictly protect the personality and all personal interests of each individual member in every way, and thus also his opinions, so that we do not interfere in them if they do not wish to do so themselves. We only do this, and so do I, when someone is looking for a discussion and help, when this requires possible internal problems and conflicts, etc., or when completely wrong behavior has to be addressed and corrected. If this is the case, then the executive committee or each individual member is available to each other privately. Thus also if it is not necessary that it must come before the entire group to the speech, if it concerns a direct group concern. So in every respect, any core group member, the board, or I can advise or assist any member. And the fact that this really works and is handled in the right way is proven by the fact that our core group members get along very well with each other, and therefore also the interpersonal relationships work, except for even the one who is not insightful and to whom you said about me that it was shameful, whatever he complained about. Unfortunately, there is also to mention, although there is a special case here, which cannot be placed within the same framework as, and which, with regard to expert help, falls outside the competence of the board of directors, the core group, and myself. In my opinion, however, all the others have no internal conflicts or problems, etc. But when these arise, which has occurred only a few times in recent years with regard to trifles, then everything was privately discussed among themselves and, as a rule, in private, so that everything was clarified again and again in each case. So it can be said with a clear conscience that there are no internal conflicts in and among the individual core group members, as claims, but rather he alone, if is disregarded. Well, finally, did what he had always done when I told him his wrong opinion and his unrealistic behavior, namely that he got up and said that he didn't have to listen to the whole thing. so he simply withdrew from the conversation and the truth by leaving.
So this is what I can only say again, that this action is also shameful and extremely regrettable as well as unreasonable in this way of. In addition, I recognize from it very exactly in his attitude his wrong and psychologically unneeded opinion, which also results in his aspired psychomethod. And from his entire way of acting, it is also recognizable, as I have already stated earlier. However, that he does not want to be instructed and is therefore also not willing to pursue a clear self-knowledge, which is why he stubbornly persists with his socio-educational and false psychological views and does not want to learn anything valuable from them. With his false assertions that the core group members are insulted in the contact talks, and that they have inner conflicts, and that the FIGU generally has wrong and useless rules, etc., he clearly refers to his big self-referential problems, of which he does not become aware and therefore denies them. In this way, he self-referentially pushes his own flaws and shortcomings, which burden him underground, towards you, the core group members and the FIGU. And what he did by simply leaving, he did what he has always done throughout his life, that is to flee from the truth, by dodging and obviously continuing to dodge the effective facts in order to persist in his false assumptions, inner conflicts, and behaviors that he reflects on others as on the core group members. This is because, in any case, he always wants to be in a leading position and to keep the upper hand and not to see his own conflicts. Because he has oriented his nature towards letting only what he himself judges and carries out apply on the one hand, and on the other hand because he wants to be leading, influential, assertive, and dominating over others. And if he cannot do that, then on the one hand he defends himself. On the other hand, when he sees himself in a hopeless situation and feels he is pushed into a corner, he simply has to flee so that he does not have to answer further questions and therefore also does not have to face reality and truth. But he cannot become clear and understandable to himself by his wrong kind in behavior, which is based on his arrogance. Consequently, he avoids everything and therefore also leaves the core group, which is probably the best with regard to the further well-being, the group peace, the personal freedom of all members, and the generally really respectable harmony of the entire core group. And this corresponds to the facts against the misrepresentations by which all core group members are empowered and show great commitment in every respect to the fulfillment of missionary work, for which I am as grateful to all as you are, as I know.
Of course, because gratitude to all is more than justified. But since you are thoroughly trained in psychology, in a much better way than is possible here on Earth for the studied psychologists, I would like to ask you for an answer regarding what your professional opinion and understanding is about a special way of acting and method of earthly psychologists, social psychologists and social pedagogues, etc. The point is that certain psychologists, etc., do group sessions or group therapies with people who are burdened with any inner conflicts and psychological problems. As the term group therapy implies, it is a matter of several psychologically or otherwise problematic persons sitting together in a room and being looked after by a so-called psychologist or social pedagogue, who must also be psychologically trained according to an earthly sense. This is done to such an extent that the psychological caregiver treats the persons to be cared for. That is to say, those persons who are psychologically or otherwise afflicted with problems, with questions and requests in such a way that they begin to feel guilty and openly confess to any problems in the circle, or in this respect come out, thereby exposing themselves to the other persons present and to the caregiver. Very often it happens that the patients, because these are the ones we are talking about, start crying and sobbing, go off in whine cramps, blame themselves in some way and lose their attitude and composure. This is then to have the effect that the traced persons thus cared for are to be freed from their psychological and other problems.
Which is nonsense. I am familiar with this unbelievably stupid and inhumane as well as personality-infringing group therapy way of acting, which I can only describe as a psychomethod applied by earthly psychologically would-be psychologists. It seduces the maltreated people and patients to humiliate themselves in front of others and to feel guilty and to unintentionally reveal their inner conflicts through external coercion, in order to be anxious from now on to recall their guilt again and again. Psychic and other problems are not eliminated or solved by this, but are only excused to the outside in that a shameful disclosure or an out in front of others is demanded and also takes place, whereby the basic problem remains, however. And what I say effectively refers to psychological or similar problems, etc., which cause the person concerned inner conflicts with pain, thoughts of guilt and feelings of guilt, as well as need, suffering, and insecurity, whereby the person concerned chokes everything into himself and hides it from others. The whole in this way thus refers to unresolved life problems as well as conscious and unconscious psychological processes of human experience and behavior, etc., which cause mental and emotional distress, problems and inner pain, etc., whereby these can only be dealt with in cooperation with a trusted person, but cannot be overcome and made to disappear by means of psychoterror. Like the aforementioned group method, that is to say, not by inducing those seeking help who suffer from inner conflicts and problems, etc., to escape through violence and coercion in group therapies. And in this way, there is no voluntariness, but effective violence and coercion in a psychomethodically suggestive form, whereby those seeking help are also humiliated in their honor and dignity as well as in their humanity.
If I understand correctly, then your explanation refers to real inner conflicts, hardships and psychological pain, etc., but not to a suppressed and hidden vice, such as secret drinking, secret drug addiction, or any other addiction or vice, nor to homosexuality in a man, or lesbianism in a woman. In these different frameworks, it happens again and again that women and men publicly confess to it and just out themselves. I don't really see any connection to what we are talking about in terms of inner conflicts, hardships, and thought-feel psychological pain.
Correct, this has nothing to do with inner, mental, emotional, and psychological and other similar problems that I have mentioned. But I wonder why you ask for my opinion, because you know them and are well versed in psychological matters.
On the one hand, this is due to the fact that, like you, I find that such a group therapy method deprives a person of his honor and dignity, and that he shamefully reveals his inner forms and conflicts to others through external violence and an external compulsion, which only concerns him or a corresponding person of trust to whom he turns. The whole of the psycho method is thus based on the way in which a person violently and compulsorily outet himself towards others, which makes him feel inferior and guilty.
Yes, that is correct, like I said.
This psycho method or psychoterror is unfortunately very widespread and is praised as a good psychological method, although the exact opposite is the case. But I think that everything that had to be said is now said about the matter at hand.
There would still be a lot to say and explain, but what has been said should actually suffice. But now, dear friend, I want to talk to you privately about a few things because there is still something to say.